Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about Daughter of Foxes by Nicole Silver. Alrighty, so I used to love a good, fast-paced, slightly trashy paranormal. Like, I loved the first few Anita Blake books. I loved Tanya Huff's Blood books. I really enjoyed Mercedes Lackey's Diana Trigard series, even though, yes, they were trash. But I've been on a slightly unfocused, undriven quest to find more books in that vein, preferably the ones that have been published recently. And I've also sort of been on an undriven, unfocused quest to read a little bit more indie published books, because I know that there's a gap in my reading in that I don't read a lot of indie. So when I saw the author of this book talking it up on Threads, I was like, sure, I'll bite. Which is hilarious, because the book features vampires. Isn't my pun great? But anyway, Daughter of Foxes is about a woman named Sue. She has no memories of her life before about a year ago when she woke up on a park bench with her wallet, her driver's license, and not much else. Since then, she's been surviving as a pickpocket and trying to figure out who and what she is. Because she knows she's not fully human. She has stronger senses than a human, heals more quickly, and can tap into a slightly superhuman fighting skill. Also, she's like a magnet for vampires and werewolves. They all think she smells so good, but none of them seem to know what she is either. One night, after a close encounter of the worst kind, where a vampire ends up with a well-deserved stake in his heart, she discovers she has orphaned a newly reborn vampire. Yevgeny is hot, thinks she smells amazing, and is a disastrous combination of utterly helpless and deadly dangerous. Because vampires, when they are freshly reborn, have no memory from their previous lives and are in a state of almost animalistic survival instinct. They are also in very serious danger from their own kind, because vampires in this world are also cannibals who love the taste of vampire blood more than almost anything else. Her split-second decision to take care of him and take him home entangles their lives completely. And to survive, they will need to find out who and what both of them are. So before I go any further in this book has a lot of sexual violence in it. Some threatened, some implied, some told as flashback, and some direct on-page from the victim's point of view assault. For me, it didn't come across as too heavy, but if that's something that's going to cause any sort of bad mental health for you, yeah, this is a book you might want to avoid. But now, to the book. First, the elephant in this room. I assumed when the author called this a sexy paranormal that it would be about the level of like the mid-series Anita Blake books, like a lot of sexual tension, maybe 2 or 3 scenes of heavy petting and kissing, maybe one on-page throbbing bits sex scene. And no, that's not what this is. This is not quite to the point of erotica. Like, the story is still mainly about the paranormal aspects and not the sex, but if you count pretty explicit masturbation scenes, we get about 1 sex scene every other chapter. None of them go on for so long that I was bored, but for someone who doesn't read a lot of spicy books like me, and by the way, I don't read a lot of spicy books not because I don't like them, it's just because they're usually romance books, and romance is just not my genre. This was just a lot more than I was used to. Now, I am not going to discuss whether I think the spicy scenes work, because I think that is one of those things that is so very personal to every reader, that it almost becomes a waste of time to try to judge whether general populations will find something interesting, sexy, hilarious, or off-putting. I see a lot of reviewers trying to be like, oh yeah, I think this is really working, this will work for you. You can't know. I can say these are not poorly written. They are nowhere near as redundant as spicy scenes I've read in some other books. But as to whether or not they're hot, that's up to you. And also, considering I don't tend to read spicy books, I'm probably not the best person to answer the question of, is this book sexy? I will say, though, I really appreciated the fact that the author made sure that the abundance of sex scenes makes sense in world. Like, first of all, Sue is paranormally attractive to anyone who might possibly be attracted to women. But also, this world, vampires almost have to have sex to survive. Sort of. So, like, vampires here, or reborn as they like to call themselves, have to raise their metabolism on a pretty regular basis to prevent themselves from shriveling into a sort of mummy-like critter that then just shrivels off to death. And one of the two ways they have of raising their metabolism is sex. The other, of course, being drinking blood. And yeah, what this does is it sort of just takes the usual undertones of drinking blood as almost sexual and just takes it to the end point of, yeah, no, it's sex. There's sex. And yeah, part of that is also why there's an abundance of sexual violence in this book. It seems that most vampires in this world have no qualms about whether the people they raise their metabolism with are willing or not. And it makes them all aggressively killable in the narrative, which is good, because like a lot of paranormals, this book features a buttload of minor antagonist monsters just being slaughtered by our heroes. And we are clearly not supposed to feel bad about that. Until the end. Which did cause just a little bit of thematic dissonance when we suddenly have a major emotional arc moment revolving around whether or not to grant mercy to one of the monsters. But, like, I've seen that transition in a lot of paranormals and other books as well, and I've seen it handled a hell of a lot worse than it is here. At least this book acknowledges that it is a transition, and the killing the monsters earlier is less minimized and less funny. So when it becomes an actual emotional question of mercy at the end, there's just less of a switch. So it didn't really bother me, but I did notice it. But I really like a lot of the world building here. A lot of the paranormals I've read throughout the years start with only like one or two paranormal entities being known, and slowly build up across the subsequent books to an entire bestiary of humanoid monsters. So like we start with just vampires being real and maybe demons, and then in book 2 we introduce werewolves, and then in book 3 we introduce mummies, and book 4 introduces witches, etc, etc, etc. And no, this book starts with the presumed full hand of monster cards. Like, yeah, we mainly focus on the vampires and the werewolves, which, one small tangent here, please, authors, if you're going to be writing were-critters, don't abbreviate them simply as W-E-R-E. Like, I'm sorry, my brain automatically reads that as were instead of wares, and I'm constantly having to stop and go, that's the wrong part of speech, that's a were, not a were. And that's just a personal request to you. Call them shapeshifters, call them something else, call them wolves even, just don't abbreviate to wares. But anyway, the point is, while vamps and wares were the ones we learned about the most in this book, there are also witches, fae, and other critters that would be really obvious spoilers to mention. And I've seen other paranormals that start with a buttload of magical entities, and it often feels a little bit overloaded in the beginning, but it didn't here. Which is impressive considering this is not a big book, and there's a lot of page count given away to sex here. And I think the reason that the author did manage to squeeze in so much world building and to introduce an entire menagerie of humanoid critters without the world building feeling rushed is because we don't know much about a lot of these other critters. Like, pretty much, except for vampires and werewolves, all we really know is that it's like our world folklore with a vague hand-waving of not quite like that. And the thing is, our Sue, our POV character, also doesn't know anything about these critters. She is trying to learn about them, and her lack of knowledge is a huge part of the narrative drive. So our lack of knowledge is the same as hers, which basically just invokes empathy from the reader to the character, rather than a feeling of like, wait, what? Why don't I know what's going on yet? So overall, I feel like the world building was very successful in this book. But that being said, while the world building did a great job of not feeling rushed, I feel like the relationship building simply did feel rushed. And I don't just mean between the main romantic pairing, though yeah, them too, but like I'll hand wave that away because the main romantic pairing developed feelings so quickly from magic, a shared trauma, like they have very similar trauma and they experience trauma together, but also they have an empty past which allows them to move things along unnaturally quickly. Like specifically the fact that both characters start their relationship with no memories gives them a reason to cling to each other. But every friendship in this book, every like allyship, every like even enemyship, feels like we go through major development stages in these relationships insanely quickly. One example, hilariously, this is the second book in a row that I've read that features a half-cocked love triangle. But yeah, so this one, the second love interest shows up like a third of the way through the book, maybe more than a third of the way through the book. And I mean, cool, if we are going somewhere with this in later books, I'm all for the relationship existing, and I'm even fine with it appearing so late as sort of just a little bit of third act conflict and a teaser as to where the series is going next. But just the on-page arc of this relationship is so fast. And yeah, this is one of those relationships where we know a lot of stuff happened off-page that we cannot know about, but what we see, there's so little of it. The transition from haven't confessed they like each other, to having sex in public, to not seeing each other for a year, to desperate romantic moment, to I see you're in another relationship, and I'm okay if you choose him instead of me. Each step felt like it happened insanely quickly. Like, oh my god, we just need a little bit more dialogue, less dramatic emotional swings here, or for the dialogue to fully envelop those like big emotions much more thoroughly. And that would help us buy the transition a little, but we also just need a little bit more page count here. But overall, across the book, I did find the dialogue in this one was just a little bit on the calm side for what was going on. Like, everyone is always being witty, sweet, mild, or just accepting in moments that I feel like people would usually show a hair more big emotions. And it didn't always bother me. It does have this really useful effect of making some of the moments that risked being too heavy to be fun a lot lighter. Because yeah, this book is clearly intended for mostly fun, and it's got some really heavy topics in here. So the relatively light dialogue prevents the emotions from feeling like they're punching you in the face constantly. Also, it's sort of just a trait of paranormals. The characters tend to be the crack a joke as they're dying kind of characters. They're the witty puns while you're killing your enemies kind of characters. They're the characters that say, I know, in response to someone saying, I love you. And I'm fine with that. But there were a few moments in this book that felt like the author was just a little bit too proud of their snarky, sassy lines that didn't really fit the mood of the scene. There were a few tag endings on the end of scenes that had me rolling my eyes just a little bit. But objectively, it just wasn't that many compared to what most the other paranormals I've read. And I think the problem would have been fixed by just a hair more aggressive editing. And on that note, yeah, there were typos. There were some just grammatically incorrect things. This one, it didn't really bother me too much. Like, I noticed a lot in the first couple of pages, and then there were a couple moments throughout the book where specifically quotation marks ended up in the wrong place, but mostly I just tuned the errors out. There are also a few lines here that were just difficult to parse in a way that I recognize as something that the author knows exactly the rhythm the line needs to be read in to make perfect sense. But the reader doesn't. So you end up having to read the line 3 or 4 times, putting imaginary commas in different places to figure out what it means. And that's the sort of thing that really needs outside eyes to tell you that it's there. The other thing I felt ever so slightly under-edited was the order of events. The book is pretty tightly paced, as in it would be objectively difficult to move some of the things around because everything happens one after another in a very clearly planned out way. But there's a lot of really high tension, high emotion, heavy action scenes immediately followed by slow sitting and thinking scenes. Like, there are multiple times Sue almost dies, and then a page later is just sitting there reading a notebook. And also, Sue realizes that Yevgeny is in danger far too soon. Like, the way it is written now, she realizes he's probably been kidnapped and then can't do anything about it for 2 days. And those 2 days are just gathering information kind of days. And a lot of that is, like, going home and waiting kind of gathering information. And I felt myself going, oh my god, what the hell are you doing? Why are you not doing anything? Go rescue him. And like, yeah, objectively she needs that information. And if she had gone in without that information, she would have been slaughtered. But there's no amount of pacing while she reads that is going to make that feel less than too relaxed. And it just cut the tension in a way it shouldn't have. And objectively, I think it would have been a relatively easy fix in this particular case. Like, I think it would have worked so much better if Sue just didn't realize he was in danger until after she got back from the garden and switched those days around, so most of her, like, running around to ask different people things happens on the second day, and then we can just time skip over her thinking, oh my god, what am I gonna do? Oh, he's been trapped and there's nothing I can do, until it's time for action. There's also one moment that is super standy-outy as, wow, that's too much over-explanation. So, like, you know those fountains that appear in Japanese gardens that are made of bamboo, that fill up with water and then tip over, making a clack sound? There's a description of one in this book that is 2 rather long paragraphs. Like, it is almost an entire page describing this fountain. And, like, I know that I do watch about 10% more anime than most Americans, but I feel like this is one of those things that, yeah, most Americans are going to have at least a vague picture in their mind of what that is. You don't need to explain it that much. Also, it takes Sue just far too long to realize that she's probably related to a fox. And I'm not saying that just because, I mean, there's a fox on the cover and the book is called Daughter of Foxes. So yes, from an outside perspective, it's super obvious. But even from her perspective, her last name translates as Fox. She finds herself drawn to fox statuettes. Everyone says she smells a bit like a canine, but not. She has amber eyes. She finds out her first name references a legend of a fox demon, and she still seems unsure if any of this means she might have anything to do with a fox. And it just sort of stretches credulity a bit. But other than that, I really liked this book. The characters were fun. Many of them were a little or completely shitty, but in a fun way. The story was entertaining. The world building was super fun. I think the author really captured the mix of monstrous but hot that is at the core of the paranormal genre. And, like, there are a couple of descriptions here that are truly horrifying. Vampires in this world can unhinge their jaws and open their mouths super wide, and I'm picturing like a green tree boa yawning, and it was a wonderful change from the a little bit cliche that vampires are often described as having a scary face. But also, there are these wonderful transition moments where, like, we go from that overextended, unhinged jaw growling at something to an angelic smile that, yeah, it really works. And it really defines those moments when the heroine is going, wait, am I falling in love with a monster? Can I fall in love with a monster? And usually those feel a little bit forced. And here, it works because that moment is truly horrifying. So it all just makes her feelings a lot more valid, and I like it. And also makes those moments immediately afterwards when the character is being silly and sweet that just makes all of the gap sweetness perfect. Like, I really loved that. The book is also bisexual as fuck, which was nice. We've got a half Asian lead. We have acknowledgements that not everyone experiences sex and gender the same way. And none of that diversity felt like it was just tacked on at the end for the sake of diversity. It felt natural to the characters and the way they think and act. We have surprisingly serious discussions of consent in this book. We have some exploration of power dynamics in monster and monster-human romance, and we have a lot of sex. So if that's something that interests you and you aren't turned off by the presence of sexual assault in a book, yeah, this one's fun. I would recommend it. Now, does that mean I'll be buying book 2? Honestly, I'm not sure. In the end, there's just a good bit more spice here than I usually look for in a book, but it was fun. And I'm beginning to think that that spice is just a more common part of paranormals nowadays than it was back in the 90s. So if I'm going to find a good one, spice might just be in it. And it's not like I dislike spice. So, maybe?